you got her book.
I sure do.
Yay.
Thanks to Kate's mom.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I bought a book too. So first of all, I want to welcome all of you. I'm Darlene Tennis, and I'm from San Jose Women's Club. Take off my glasses for a second. San Jose Women's Club, and today this is part of the T series, which is to teach, engage, and activate. So the Tea Time Speaker Series is a joint effort between the San Jose Women's Club, La Raza Historical Society, and the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley. Is Gabby online from Latina Coalition? Not yet. Okay. So, and it is, we all got grants of money to do talks about women in different respects. And those monies came from Silicon Valley, Santa Clara County Office of Women's Policy, Division of Equity and Social Justice. So I believe, is Camilla on the line? Camilla, are you there?
Cecilia is here. Cecilia Carrillo.
I'm sorry,
Carrillo.
Cecilia. Did you want to give a little, say something real quick? Cecilia.
Maybe needs to unmute.
Unmute yourself, yes. If you can hear me.
Computer was acting up, but thank you for having me and thank you for doing this. We're honored to be supporting such a great program over at the women's I've been there, the women's I can't even think right now. I've been working all day.
I understand you.
I've been on meetings all day long, and so, but I couldn't miss this. So I told Laura I was going to come in and stay as long as I could, but we're glad that we were able to support, and I'm looking forward to seeing, I have the book also, so the San Jose Women's Club is awesome. I've been there for luncheons, and I just thank you guys for being here.
Thank you so much. So
Cecilia, thank you for your support of the T series on behalf of the Women's Club and the Latina Coalition. It's wonderful to know you're there in the county. Thank you for making a little extra time in the day to show up for us so we can see you. Thank you.
Yeah, and so that was Christine Kraft that was speaking, and she is the president of the San Jose Women's Club. So that's Christine. And we invite all of you to come check out the San Jose Women's Club. If you want to host a watch party right now, if you need explanation of how to host a watch party, don't do it. But if you don't need explanation, host a watch party right now on your Facebook, and that would be fabulous for us, or just share the live feed. So we do have live feeds going on right now on the San Jose Women's Club, Latina Coalition, and Casa Q Facebook page. So if you want to share those, that would be great. We want you guys to participate. So please, on the next slide, please participate. Raise your hands. There's a little raise your hand button on the bottom. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. If it gets too wild, we may mute everybody, and when you raise your hand, then we'll unmute you when you have a question. But we may leave you off unmute right now. It's hard to see when other people are speaking. Leave your cameras on. We'd love to see your reactions, your expressions, your claps, your thumbs up, you know, so we know what's going on. If you have a lot of distractions in the background, you know, from different reasons why you have distractions in the background, please mute your button so that it is not distraction to us. And we want you, again, this is going to be an open forum tonight. There is no long slideshow like I do. Kate is going to be a free-for-all. So we are just going to have a fabulous conversation. Was talking about, and we have a beautiful clubhouse down on 11th Street, and there's a quick rundown of our history. And we have been supporting women's causes in the community for 125 years with the San Jose Women's Club. So we're very proud of that legacy. So now today, who are we talking to? Kate Schatz.
Hey everybody.
Yes, and so she is a feminist writer, activist, and educator. She and And I wanted to mention her illustrator, who does a fabulous job because they do this together. You know, we women have to empower each other, right? So her illustrator is Miriam Klein Stahl, and she is the illustrator for all these Rad Women books. So the first Rad American Women book she published was published by City Lights in spring of 2015, and it spent 11 weeks. It's amazing. Record there, 11 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It doesn't get better than that, people. Okay, so then she did a follow-up book, The Rad Women Worldwide, which was published in September 2016 and debuted number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list. So she has 2 New York Times bestseller lists. And she might have more, but she'll let me know that. My Rad Life was Penguin House in 2017. And this was a journal that encourages you to think, create, reflect, and explore your own radness. So that was a journal as an accompaniment to these other books. And then she did Rad Girls Can, which was published by 10 Speed Press in 2018. And then her most recent book, it just came out in May, I believe, Rad American History A to Z. And each letter of the alphabet, instead of individuals, it tells a story of a significant moment in Americans' progressive history. And then she also has Solidarity Sundays. She's it's a nationwide network of over 200 feminist activist groups who meet monthly to take coordinated nonviolent political action, and we'll ask her more about that later, so she can talk about that. So to keep the conversation going, and so let's just kick back and meet Kate Schatz.
Hi, everybody.
So we could take the slides down. Yeah, there we go. So, Kat, I was just going to start the conversation. Oh, actually, I didn't even talk about you. So, you guys, she grew up in San Jose.
I was just going to say that. I'm a San Jose native, so.
Yeah, and you're a slug.
I am a UC Santa Cruz banana slug. It's true.
Yes, and then I hear you right now. You're living on the island of Alameda with 2- and 4-legged critters. I understand.
Yes, I am here in Alameda on Ohlone land, but in what we now call Alameda. Yeah.
So I see that you were a teacher. You've taught everything in different ways, from middle school to college age students. So how did your teacher career transfer into becoming a full-time author?
That's an excellent question. And so thank you everybody for having me, and thanks to everybody for showing up to listen. I too feel very zoomed out by the end of the day usually. So I always feel really honored when people during dinner time and the evening, show up. So hopefully this will be enriching and fulfilling. So my teaching career, what I always say is, from a very young age, I think I was always drawn to writing, to political activism, and to teaching and education. Even when I was in high school, at Willow Glen High School in San Jose, I was, it's kind of where I discovered political activism. I wasn't a teacher then, but I felt like I wanted to be a teacher and go into education. And I also was writing all the time. So those have really always been passions of mine. And I've always felt like they were very interconnected. So I did, I always credit my English teacher at Willow Glen High is really, my junior year, is the person who really inspired me to take myself seriously as a writer. So I was really thinking, I'm going to be a teacher. That's what I'm going to do. And then I had this, Greg Martin at Willow Glen High really inspired me to pursue writing as a major in college, which I didn't know was a thing.
I want to know the teacher's name before you move on, because I think we need to give her a shout out.
It's a he. Mr. Greg Martin was at Willow Glen High for years, and he did a creative writing unit one time when I was a junior in high school, and I had never done creative writing in school. I had done it on my own for years, since I was probably in first grade at books in elementary school. But finally in 11th grade, we did an actual creative writing unit, and I wrote my first short story. And I remember him pulling me aside. Really, it's like something out of like an after school special. He pulled me aside and said, "This story is really good." He said, "You should be a writer. Like, you should really take this seriously." I was like, well, I don't know. And then I remember him telling me that I could actually major in creative writing. I literally didn't know that that was an option. So I did go to UC Santa Cruz, and the other story I tell with that is that, again, my intention was to be an educator. And specifically, I wanted to do environmental education. I was really involved in environmental activism. It was kind of my like gateway to social justice work. And so I was going to be an environmental studies major at UC Santa Cruz. So I got there, time to enroll for classes. Intro to ecology was at 8 a.m. and intro to feminism was at noon. And I was like, wow, I could take a class that starts at noon and I wouldn't have to wake up early. So I actually enrolled in intro to feminism instead of ecology, just so I could sleep in. And that class, Intro to Feminism at UC Santa Cruz, was also one of those life-changing moments for me. And
who was that teacher? Because I love
that
hearing
was
teachers.
the legendary Bettina Aptheker, who is an just iconic feminist theorist, was one of the people who really invented the field of women's studies. And that class just put me on a whole new trajectory toward, I became a women's studies major and then a double major in creative writing. And so, and I also really realized that I could be fusing these things. I have to say, I'm realizing I got a manicure from a 7-year-old last night and forgot about it. So you're all seeing my fingernails. And I couldn't find nail polish remover. So this is not my normal look here. But, yeah. So I did go on to teach. I always felt like I wanted to be teaching, and I still think of myself as an educator, even though I'm not in the classroom.
You are.
I do a lot of school visits, but I do feel like through my books, this is my way of teaching now. I'm not necessarily being in the classroom with the students, but the books have become my way of teaching. So that's a long way of answering that question.
So your first book, what was the title of your first book? You were going to show it to me right now that you wrote, published, I should say. You published.
Oh, my first book of fiction, I actually don't have it in the pile here next to me, but I did write a book of fiction called Rid of Me that came out in 2007, but that's not, my pile next to me is limited with just these books.
So how did you get your first book written? Like, how did you sit down and say, I'm going to get this done?
I did, after I graduated from UC Santa Cruz, I decided after a few years of living in Oakland and teaching and working as a tutor, I decided to get an MFA. So I went and did my MFA in creative writing at Brown University in Providence. And when I graduated from there, I was working on a project, and I actually met an editor who was an editor for a book series that I really admired, and I kind of pitched her my book idea on the spot, and she gave me her card and said, this is a great idea, like you should really follow up. And I remember thinking that she didn't really mean it, and just, no, she didn't really mean it. And the person I was with at the time really encouraged me and said, if that person gave you their business card, they want to hear from you. And I did follow up, and I ended up writing a book proposal and was able to write that book. So it's always one of when I give, especially to younger people, and I give advice, I say, look, if you make a connection, if someone gives you their email or their card, or, says, hey, feel free to reach out to me, always reach out to them. Don't, it can be intimidating, but, it's always worth a shot. So that's what
I tell people that follow up is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like so many times, like when I do talks, I give cards, as you probably know, to students and things. They give me a call and they don't, and every once in a while you will get somebody.
Yeah. And the ones that do follow up, I take that real seriously. I take mentorship very seriously.
That's great. So how did where did the idea come from for the whole Rad Women series?
Yeah. So I was always been incredibly interested in women's histories, in the stories of, and just little interesting histories that we don't know. I mean, I definitely, back to my time at Willow Glen High, I was definitely that, I think I drove my AP history teacher, Miss Philp, I think I drove her pretty crazy because I was really kind of scowling in the back of the classroom with my copy of Howard Zinn's People in History of the United States going, why aren't we learning about this? Well, when are we going to learn about gay rights? Well, why aren't we doing more Black history? Like, I was really, even then I had a strong sense that what I was getting in the classroom, I knew that it wasn't the real story. I knew that the histories, the portraits of the old dead white presidents on the wall. I knew that was not the full story, and I wanted a lot more. So I always was really interested in just learning that on my own. So when my daughter was 2, she's now, oh my God, she's 11. So when she was 2 years old, I was, one day she was taking a nap, and I sat down and had a moment to myself, and I suddenly had like a brainstorm of an ABC that, instead of being like A is for apple or B is for, baboon, each letter would be a story about a different woman from American history. And it's interesting because when I've had as I kind of got excited about the idea, I think because of my upbringing with my family, coming from San Jose, going to UC Santa Cruz, I think I grew up in such a diverse communities, and became really aware of racial justice and white privilege and my position as a white person very early. It was never even a question to me whether these women in the book would be diverse. It was just an obvious thing. I was like, well, of course they're going to be mostly not women. I want to focus on marginalized people who, I knew right away, I was like, S is not going to be for Susan B. Anthony. I wanted to find stories that were going to surprise people, that wouldn't be the women that normally show up in history books, but are rad nonetheless. So I got the idea, and I eventually, I wanted it to be, I was thinking that I wanted it to be illustrated in a way that would also be engaging for parents. So I wanted it to look cool and bold and not like a cutesy little kid book. I wanted it to,
like a normal history book, boring normal history. Yeah, no, I love the illustrator.
So that's how it came to be. So
How did you and the illustrator meet? Like, how did you guys get together?
So I knew Miriam. Miriam lives in Berkeley, and she's someone who I knew her work as an artist. We have a lot of mutual friends, and she's just an old school queer punk who's been just making art and doing activism in the Bay Area for a long time. And I had seen portraits she had done of like social justice heroes. She'd done a beautiful woodcut of James Baldwin that a friend of mine had framed in their living room. And when I was thinking of who might illustrate this book, I thought of her work because it had this boldness. And I was thinking that, I wanted something that would reflect the strength of the women I was writing about. So I reached out to her, asked if she would be wanting to collaborate. As the story goes, she said, I sent her a very long email, saying, I'm sure you're really busy. She runs the art program at Berkeley High School. So I said, I know you're teaching, you're so busy. And she just wrote back and said, yes. And I was like, okay. And then she said, how about we meet like tomorrow? So we got together. I had most of the list of the women that I wanted to write about done. She texted me that night and had already done 5 of the illustrations for the book.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
So I always tell that story because it's like, I think for artists, for anybody trying to get motivated, if you're ever stuck or you've got a project, it's hard to get off the ground, get a partner, get a collaborator, it really, ideally someone who works faster than you, because it really motivated me. And I should clarify that her illustrations are, they're paper cuts. So she takes a black piece of paper and she draws the illustration. She copies it from an image, and then she takes an X-Acto knife and she just cuts it out.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's like papel picado, a lot of other cultures that have paper cut tradition. In this new book, our Rad American History book, she added, as you can see, so she does the paper cut, and then she added watercolor behind. So
yeah, that's cool.
That's a portrait of Harriet Tubman. So here's A in this book is for Alcatraz. And it's a story of the 1969 occupation of Alcatraz by Native American activists. So she's got the paper cut there, and then the watercolor. And if you've been to Alcatraz, you know that that graffiti from 1969 is still up on Alcatraz.
So somebody asked a question, and it popped by so quick I couldn't see who asked it. But what was the most surprising woman that was in the book that where you're like, wow, this is cool, I'm so happy I discovered her?
Okay, I have, at this point, I've written about over 200 people now in all of these books. So I always have I want to talk about everybody, but I do have an answer for that. And I actually think the person who most surprised me came from the second book we did, which is Rad Women Worldwide, which, as the title suggests, is about women from all over the world. And there were some women that I really knew, absolutely, I wanted to include. And then several people, and I do like to really crowdsource. So I like to ask a lot of people who should be in these books. And for this book, I did ask people from all over the world. You know, I'm American, I have a limited perspective. So I asked friends from Jamaica, who from your culture should be in this book? But the one person that a lot of people suggested was Josephine Baker. And I was familiar, I knew who Josephine Baker was. I knew of her as, you know, a dancer and a performer. I knew her iconic hairstyle and the kind of flapper aesthetic. I knew she was a performer in Paris. I had a vague sense of that, but I did not know her full story, which has, I mean, it's an incredible story. She basically worked for the French resistance during the war. She worked as a spy. She went undercover and seduced Nazi officers. She smuggled their secrets in invisible ink and notes pinned to her underwear. She got the Medal of Honor. I mean, she just, and then she came back to the United States and helped desegregate nightclubs all across the country and faced extraordinary racism. She spoke at the 1963 March on Washington, and then she adopted like 18 children and lived in a French castle. So that was just an example of a story where I really thought I knew, like, oh yeah, I know who she is. And once I sat down to do my research, I was just like, oh my God, this is so fascinating. She also used to have a pet cheetah that she named Chiquita, and she had a diamond collar for it, and she walked it. You know, she was like Beyonce level way before.
So like your new book about historical moments, I know there's a ton of negativism. I talked about that negativism history that we just don't learn about, right? Just kept out of the way. People don't like it. So what was one of the moments in American history that you were like, God, I've never learned about this? There's probably quite a few moments actually in your book. But what is one of the ones that was surprising that you felt we didn't know about?
Well, you know, I mean, this has been, I will say, so this book, again, Rad American History A to Z, is a different book from the other ones that Miriam and I have done, because the other ones did focus on individuals. So there are more profiles of a single person. And with this book, we wanted to show, we wanted to show that it's not just individuals who make an impact, who really make change, right? They're all part of a larger network of communities and groups that organize and actually create change. And we wanted to give a broader historical context for social change too. So I think, you know, I would say with this one, so we really wanted to kind of span history. Well, I'm like looking through it now, I'm like, what did I not know? I was really, so F in this book, this is maybe a small one, but I thought it was really interesting. F in the book is for the Federal Theater Project. And it's really about the Federal Arts Project during the Great Depression and as part of the New Deal, and the kind of time when the government was actually funding artists and really funding really radical artists and theater and performers as a way to stimulate the economy and kind of rebound from the Great Depression. So I just think this is a really interesting part of history, and I learned all about the kind of role of radical theater, and it kind of butts up against McCarthyism and censorship. So that was one that I didn't know really anything about before I began the research. That was fascinating. But I think it's, you know, this book came out in March, about a week before Shelter in Place. And it's been really interesting to me, and, you know, of course, in everything that we've seen happening in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the kind of uprising that we've seen around racial justice, that I do find that people seem more interested in American history than they usually do in a sustained way. And that I've seen so many people kind of waking up or becoming aware of aspects of America's racial history that they didn't know about, right? So I think Tulsa was such a big example. So, and that was really kind of spurred when Trump did that rally, that stupid rally in Tulsa. And suddenly people started talking about the Tulsa massacre in 1921. And that's something that I'd known about and had researched and wrote about in here. But it was interesting to see this kind of larger scale, people suddenly learning about this. And then that leads them to learn about other things that have the Red Summer and the kind of rise of lynchings in the 1920s and all of this stuff that people don't learn about at all. And I think that is also as concepts about systemic and institutional racism have become a little more part of the mainstream conversation. People are starting to talk more about histories around redlining and gerrymandering and these systemic systems that have been in place that, again, we just don't learn about. So I touch on a lot of those in the book, but I'm really glad to see people talking about them more. I would say, let's see, maybe if
So when I first saw your books, I was going to say, I didn't know, because I saw them talked about as children's books somewhere, but I don't know, is it a children's book? Because I feel like it's great for adults.
Yeah, it is. And I kind of, about the first book, I say, this is a children's book for everyone. And I've always felt like good stories are good stories. And there's a lot of incredible children's literature out there that I love. But I think that I've always found that if you ask a lot of adults, what are the books that you've read in your lifetime that have had the biggest impact on you? So many adults will reference at least one book that they read as a child. I always say Charlotte's Web is still one of my favorite books in the world.
Me too, I love Charlotte.
I have a tattoo of it on my arm. And so the books that we read as young people are so impactful. And the other thing is, I think we see so many adults reading young adult literature, YA novels. I still reread Harry Potter. So my point is, I don't think that we have to have such a dividing line between children's literature and what can be appealing for adults. That said, it was a surprise for me when this book came out, and I realized that adults were reading it themselves. And I distinctly remember when it first came out and I was doing a book signing and there was an older gentleman who bought it. And I said, oh, is this for your grandchild? And he said, well, no, it's actually for myself. This seems really interesting. And I thought, oh, wow, I think we wrote something that's going to appeal to people of all ages. That said, Darlene, this book
I think it's a family book. These are family books.
This book, the new book, I definitely envision is more for kind of middle school and up. It's denser, it's longer. It's like a chunkier history. So, but I'm really, I think that everything in here is appropriate for young readers in terms of content, but hopefully it's interesting to people of all ages.
So I know that we're going to put the link to your Conan O'Brien interview, and somebody asked, Laura asked, how did you become his whiteness tutor? Because as we know right now, it's difficult to be white. You are a white woman, okay? It's difficult to be white in America.
As it should.
Yes. So how do you handle it, Kate? How do you handle that?
So this, to tell the story for folks that don't know this, about a week after, so I've been involved in anti-racist work and talking about it, talking to white people, talking to people of color, talking about racism and white privilege. It's something that it's been part of my work for a really long time. Actually, honestly, it really started in San Jose when I was in high school. I had an awakening in 9th grade. This is a little, I'll get to the question, but I think it could be interesting for folks because it's really rooted in San Jose. When I was in 9th grade at Willow Glen High School, I was asked to be part of a panel of students talking to prospective parents who were interested in maybe sending their kids to that school. And I was there to represent the accelerated, the accelerated classes, the smart kid classes or whatever. And I remember getting questions from parents in the audience that were totally coded, racially coded. They were basically asking what it was like for me to go to school with Mexican kids. And they didn't say it like that, but I was able at that age to hear that in their questions. How much did I mix with other students? And did I have any trouble with other kinds of students in my classes? And it was this whole strange thing. And I was standing in front of everybody answering these questions. And it hit me afterward. I was like, those parents were racist. Those parents were wondering if their white kid is going to be okay with Mexican kids at this school. And I ended up writing my first letter to the editor, to the Willow Glen resident. I'm sure if my mom is watching, she probably has this clipping still. But I wrote a letter to the Willow Glen resident calling out the racism of these white parents and standing up for my classmates, and the Latino kids that I grew up with, and really calling that out. So that's, I kind of like, since then, this has been a thing I've been talking about. So thanks to those racist white parents in 1993 or whatever for waking me up to it. But to this moment, I have a good friend named Kamau Bell, who's a comedian. He's got a fantastic show called United Shades of America on CNN. Kamau and I have worked together for a long time. The week after George Floyd was murdered, Kamau ended up getting booked on Conan O'Brien's show to talk about what was going on. And Kamau had reached out to me a few days before and said, I keep getting emails from really white, rich, powerful white people asking, what do I do? What do I do in this moment? And he had asked me, he was like, can you help them? What do I tell them? He's like, I don't know what to tell them. I'm a Black dude. I'm freaked out. I don't know what to say. And I was like, Conan or Kamau, you can just send me your white people. It's fine. I'll talk to them. I'll do whatever.
Send me your white people.
And then I did not expect the first person he would send my way to be Conan O'Brien, but he went on Conan and he kind of as a joke said, Conan, I've got a white lady who's going to help you out. Her name is Kate Schatz. So I followed up and I actually engaged in an incredibly thoughtful email exchange with Conan O'Brien. He was curious, he was interested. I gave him a lot of links and resources. I sent him a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Actually, I sent one for his whole family. And then he ended up inviting me to record a segment with him. So we did that a couple of weeks ago. And we had a 40-minute conversation about his role as a white person in this business. I challenged him on asking, why he wasn't asking his white guests about how they feel about Black Lives Matter. And we actually had a great conversation. So I don't know how, I'm not really officially his whiteness tutor, but I was happy in that moment.
I think you need a badge for that.
It was, I think I'll take any opportunity I can to use my platform to have those conversations with people that that a lot of folks are not used to having. And so I was, that was, and all the plot twists that 2020 has thrown our way, that was one of the more surreal ones.
So Sandra, I want to say we did put the link to the full interview. It is a great interview. And those of you that aren't familiar with interviews, 35-40 minutes is a long time, particularly for an interview. Most interviews are 3 to 5 minutes long. And so for him to take that amount of time was extraordinary, actually.
Yeah.
So somebody asked right now about, are you going to do a book on women scientists, engineers, high-tech people?
So I am probably not, but several other people have. A funny thing, when I got the idea for this book, there were really not a lot of other books out there like it. And that was kind of part of my motivation for creating this book for my daughter. I wanted her to have empowering, inspiring books. And I didn't see anything out there. So we did this book. It became a bestseller. There are now a lot of books like it. And I say that with love and appreciation for those books. So there's a wonderful one called Women of Science by Rachel Ignatowski. There's a classic Women in Science book by, Vivian Gordimer. I'm just butchering all the names tonight. Vivian Gornick. But there's a few other ones that focus on women in science and in STEM. So I'm in a way, I think this book kicked off a real trend in publishing. People didn't expect a book about mostly women of color from history, many of whom people haven't heard of. They didn't expect a book like that to do well. It did, and it opened the door for a lot of other books. So I don't think we'll do that one, but luckily other people have.
So I want you guys to remind yourselves that you can ask Kate questions. So just raise your hand if you have a question that you want to ask her out loud.
You can do that too.
And in the interim, what's your next project?
Oh, well, it's a funny, when the pandemic came upon us, like many other people, I found that like many other people who work in the creative field, all of my work just kind of ground to a halt. My entire book tour was canceled. All my school visits were canceled. I was supposed to be on a stage with Margaret Atwood interviewing her at UC Santa Cruz in April. I was supposed to have a huge opening at the Oakland Museum on the history of women in the Bay Area. All of that went away. And it took a few months. And I was also homeschooling my two wild children. But luckily things have picked up. So I have a few things in the works that like are all kind of pending. Can't totally, I don't know if they're going to happen yet, so I don't want to jinx anything. But I do have another book I'm working on, and you know, trying to pitching a lot of other ideas at the moment.
Well, let's talk about today.
Yeah.
So K is for Kamala.
K is for Kamala today.
Yes. So what have you got to, what are your input or what are your thoughts on everything that happened today?
I'm thrilled. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about the choice. I found myself over the past week really starting to gravitate toward hoping it was going to be Kamala. I think I've taken the stance for a while that, you know what, whoever he picks, let it be a woman of color, and then let's just go. Let's just do this thing. But I was finding that I was really hoping that it was her. And I was refreshing Twitter all morning and, you know, kind of figuring it would be today. And I'm really happy. I don't think she's a perfect person. I don't think she has a perfect record. I think there's a lot of things that I disagree with about her, but I think she is the perfect person for this job in this moment. And that's kind of been the thing that I've been saying today. I think that I think we all know that Biden's going to likely be a one-term president. He is 77 years old, and I think that brings with it a lot of wisdom and experience, but I'm glad that she's going to be there. I think she's fierce. I think that she can withstand all the attacks that are going to come her way. And I'm feeling a lot of like Bay Area pride for her. You know, I think it's really historic, and it also, I think, is going to give a lot of us the energy and the excitement to, you know, I mean, this election is 3 months away, and we're still in the midst of just the most overwhelming global pandemic, surreal time, and just this, you know, uprising around the world. So I think we needed something to get us excited. And I also think, you know, it's notable to me and a lot of folks that I know who really work on police reform as well as police and prison abolition, you know, that there are strong critiques to be made of Biden's record around, you know, his Crime Bill Act of 1994, his work in criminal justice, as well as hers. But I think that if we've ever had a moment where mainstream politicians are open to the pressure of activists, it's now. And I think that a lot of the activists, leaders of Black Lives Matter and other folks who've really been working on some pretty radical, major transformative stuff are finding a lot of their ideas being heard more this year. So I think there's a really incredible opportunity for that. So I'm excited. I'm gonna order my sign, put it in the yard.
Speaking about women in history, because I do history talks too, and I know every woman in history gets trashed and told they're crazy and they're everything under the sun, as we know, any radical woman, right? Any rad woman.
Absolutely.
And so, like, even today on Facebook, a female that I know, a woman, she wrote, "Oh, Willie Brown slut." Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so I was like, it was so offensive to me. I don't care who you vote for, whatever your policy is. Why do you have to say that? You know what I mean? And then another female saying it just really bugged that.
Well, because, you know, misogyny, we've internalized misogyny as well. It's a powerful force.
Mhm.
And, you know, actually, I will say that I did get some good advice today from someone who was like, you know what, if you feel excited about this, maybe the next 24 hours, 48, maybe stay off social media. Let the news cycle spin. Let everybody say all the stuff that they're going to, all the critiques immediately, you know. And again, there is space to critique her. That's fine. But you know what? Just, it's okay to be excited. And, you know, it's just I found myself getting kind of drawn into some social media stuff. And I was like, you know, I'm going to put this away. I'm just going to be happy about this and let the flurry of hot takes on it calm down, because this is, no matter how you slice it, this is historic, and it's really exciting. I just saw someone had a question. I clicked and read it, and it was a really great question, which was that what is one, someone asked about one quality that I see in common.
Kate Carlson. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the question is, what is one quality that I see in common with radical women? And I talk about that a lot when I talk about the women that we've written about in the book, you know, which has spanned, you know, 18th century range. But what I tend to say is that I think the quality that people have in common is a willingness to take a risk. And that, maybe that sounds a little trite, but like, it's really, I think that these women are willing to, they have something that they care about passionately, whether it's social change or a sport or art or, you know, their family or their community. There's something that they really care about, and they are willing to take a risk and stand up for that thing. And many of them risk their lives to do it. You know, many of them risk being ostracized from communities, or they risk losing or failing or doing it wrong. But I think that's the most common thread in all of these women that I've learned about, is that willingness to just really to believe in something and to really go for it.
So I feel like the sisterhood, okay, because we got this, you know, today, of course, we're San Jose Women's Club and Latina Coalition. So we have this sisterhood thing going on. She's got a sorority behind her, which are strong. Sororities are strong. But it's like, you know, you have these women that are against you, okay? Like even when we talked about suffrage recently, there's all these women that were against suffrage. They were against women's right to vote. And then you have, and that's why I liked pointing out all these people along your path, whether they were male or female, the people that lifted you up. You know what I mean? I always tell people to surround yourself with people that bring you up and not bring you down, okay? Yeah. So I, you know, talk about like some of that, some of your base, some of your support that you have from different people.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and to your point, it's, you know, we can't forget that, you know, I mean, what's our horrific statistic? 53% of white women voted for Trump. What is, you know, what, you know, like, it's just, you know, the fact that we share a gender does not mean that we always are going to agree, and or that we should assume some kind of solidarity. I think that was one of my biggest lessons when I started in my women's studies learning was, you know, there's no universal woman. There's no just one kind of, in the same way that, you know, there's no universal Latino. There's no, you know, there's no one way to be a Black person. There's no one way to be a woman and to think. It is wonderful when we can support each other and when we can find solidarity, but it should not be assumed. And absolutely, I've had people of all genders that have lifted me up. So, I mean, my network that sustains me, I don't know if my mom is watching, but hi, Mom. I was lucky to grow up, and my dad too. Hi, Dad. So I have, you know, wonderful parents. I grew up with a lot of really strong female role models. My grandmother was an art teacher in San Jose for many years. She taught at what was then Markham Middle School. She taught art for years and was, you know, was really one of my inspirations because she was an artist. And, you know, so I feel really glad that I had an example of a woman artist, you know, from a very early age. And yeah, my mom, my aunt, my girlfriend, my daughter, my son, you know.
If your mom's here now, what's the last advice you went to for your mom?
What was that?
What's the last advice you got from your mom?
Oh gosh, she'll be mad at me if I don't think of something good. I just saw her a couple days ago, so you know, I'm sure it was something really wise. No, she's been wonderful, and I mean, I feel really, you know, my parents are in San Jose, and it's been really great to be able, we have decided to be able to see each other during quarantine, and they are, you know, we kind of in a pod with them. And I'm incredibly grateful that they are able to, that we are able to see them. They're healthy, and they get to spend time with my children. That is really special. So I'm sure my mom has given me some full advice around parenting recently. In my moments of totally losing it, when I just don't know what to do about school and kids and everything.
How many kids do you have?
I have two.
Two kids. How old are they?
7 and 11.
Oh, 7 and 11. That's a great age. No wonder why you write children's books. But they're not. They're family books.
They are, yes. And I don't even know. It's funny, you know. People always ask if my kids have read my books. I'm like, I don't know. I put them out in the house, but I'm not going to force them to read them. You know. But
what books do you read to your children?
you know, I actually, recently took my son, we were reading The Island of the Blue Dolphin, the classic young adult book by Scott Odell. I love that book so much. He's been really into that. My kids right now they're very independent readers. They are at the stage where they don't necessarily want me to read to them. But I mean, we've read Harry Potter, and we've read, all kinds. They like reading graphic novels. I mean, I feel very lucky that they are big readers. I want to be sure to shout out Hicklebees, the wonderful bookstore, and I wanted to make sure I always tell my personal connection to Hicklebees, who I know worked with you on this event. My mom actually worked at Hicklebees when I was very, very young, and that's where I learned to read. And when in the old location, if people have been to Hicklebees or remember, it used to be on the other side of Lincoln Avenue in Willow Glen, and my mom would take me with her to work, and I would sit in that. So Hicklebees has this old clawfoot bathtub that's full of pillows, and kids can go in it and read. And my mom would actually, that bathtub has been there for 40 years. My mom would put me in that bathtub and give me a stack of books, and I would just sit there quietly and read while she helped customers. And that's really where I learned to read. And I have vivid memories of being in there reading those books. So when the first book, when Rad American Women came out, I got to do a book launch there, and Valerie at Hicklebees let me sign the wall next to the bathtub. So whenever I'm down, I mean, normal times when I'm down there, my kids go to Hicklebees and they go in the bathtub and they sit there and read, and it's a very special place.
Yeah, and we definitely need to give a shout out to Valerie Lewis, who brought you here today, but she's just an amazing. Hicklebees is really known across the nation. I was fortunate enough to go to Highlights Foundation Retreat Center, and they knew Hicklebees back on the East Coast. Like, everybody knows Hicklebees because it's such an amazing children's bookstore. And all of Kate's books are available at Hicklebees if you're supporting women-owned businesses here. If somebody could put Hicklebees a link down there, that would be great.
That'd be great. Yeah, please support them. I didn't know how famous Hicklebees was until my first book came out, and I really was in the children's book world, and I would meet people all over who were like, oh, Hicklebees. And I was like, yeah, Hicklebees? So it actually is true. It is known. Valerie is legendary. There are not that many independent children's bookstores left, just as there's not that many independent feminist, or women-focused bookstores. They're really, kind of dying off. So it's been, it makes me think there's also not a lot of Black-owned independent bookstores, and it's been incredible to see so much support for Black-owned bookstores in the past few months, to the point that some of them were totally overwhelmed and couldn't even handle all the orders that were coming in. But I want to encourage folks as much as possible to support those independent booksellers.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hi.
Can I?
Go ahead, Laura.
Okay. So, hi, Kate. Laura Wolford. I'm a member of the Women's Club. I'm also one of the kind of hosts of the Soul Sun Solidarity Sunday San Jose group. Yep, we've got a few of the other coordinating group is also on the call. And so we were so excited to hear that you were going to be coming. So just, can you elaborate on the Soul Sun mission and share with everybody what that was about? And I would really like to know, can you attribute all your efforts as well as I know you didn't do it by yourself, but we really flipped the house, right, in 2018. And I don't even know what the national number's up to, but I know that it's, thousands of people across the country that are participating in Solidarity Sundays chapters. So I don't know, just talk a little bit about that. And we're super active in San Jose. We meet, the second Sunday of every month, and it's a rad group of women that are participating.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Hearing that makes me so happy. So Solidarity Sundays, or Sol Sun as we call it, was something that I started in January of, actually in December of 2015. And our first meeting was January 2016, so before the election. I started it with my good friend and neighbor, Leslie Van Every, and we were seeing so many women that we knew being really frustrated by current events, by politics. This is kind of right after the San Bernardino shooting. During the primary, Trump still didn't even seem like a possibility. We were still assuming that it was going to be Hillary, but there was so much going on, and we found that people were posting an angry post, but not really knowing what to do. And so we started Solidarity Sundays as a way to get people together, focused on women, to kind of give them a strategy and a way to take coordinated political action. So every month we'd have a house party, we would have a little script and little packets of what you would do, the actions you would take, getting people to call their representatives and write letters. That is something that we did for months, and then the election happened, and suddenly the group really expanded and ended up becoming nationwide. And people started chapters all over the country. And there's one of what we call the info script. It's basically a guide, so everybody's taking the same action. And when we started it, we never imagined that it would be more than just us doing it. We had about 30 people that came regularly to our house. But it's like a lot of groups that sprung up in the wake of the 2016 election, Indivisible, the Swing Left, all of these really great groups, even the Women's March. And at this point, I actually don't work with Solidarity Sundays anymore. I was able to because part of my goal was I wanted to empower other women to know how to take meaningful political action. And when there was something happening in the world, how do you learn about it? How do you figure out what's actually going to make an impact, what you should actually do? And that's still the work I do. But I eventually kind of turned it over to a wonderful team of people who still put together the info and help coordinate. But I love knowing that there are these independent chapters that are really active. And in terms of what role did we have? I mean, I think there was a huge collective effort. I think it was this groundswell, of those groups that formed, the kind of work of Indivisible, the energy of the Women's March really pushed through, and we saw the results in 2018, and flipping the House and the blue wave, and also how many young women of color, progressive, trans, just really interesting, dynamic people were getting elected, and we're still seeing that as more and more people win primaries. So I remain. I'm always like really cynical and kind of grossed out by politics, but also excited and hopeful. So thank you for continuing to do that work. It's really, really great.
Hey, I see that Betty is on. Anthene, unmute yourself for a second. So Betty, I just always have to give a shout out to Betty Chandler because she's 100 and how old is she now, Anthene?
Betty Ann.
Betty Ann, not Betty.
Happy birthday.
No, she's 100. How old is it? How old are you now?
103 next Monday.
Wow.
And I'm the oldest living member of the San Jose Women's Club.
Wow.
And I have loved every minute of it. And we're 5 generations. Now my daughter, Athene, and 5. And my grandmother started at the old building, and then my mother, and then I, and then my daughter, and my granddaughter. It's very exciting, and I adore all the people in the Women's Club, and I treasure every minute have been there and plan to still be there.
Wonderful. Diana, what are some changes you've seen in women? Because you've been around a while.
What are some changes you've seen in women?
Oh dear.
Well, her mother, my grandmother, was a businesswoman, an independent businesswoman, in Decimal Cycles since 1896. And her father started it and she inherited it. So, and mom was a businesswoman and raised 5 children all her life. So, she's been that kind of busy gal, independent and still very active. What have you seen any changes that you would, identify?
I don't think so, except that I just adore every member of the Women's Club and every section. I like the different sections, and I belong to a lot of them. And I'm just delighted to be a part of it all.
I'd say she's been a radical woman in her own way.
Betty Ann Chandler, it's Anthene is her daughter whose name is coming up. So
happy birthday. That is, so you were, Betty Ann was 3 years old when the 19th Amendment was ratified, and the women were able to vote. That's next Tuesday, August 18th, is the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment.
How about that?
When some women got the right to vote.
When white women were given the option.
Yeah. So does anybody else have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask a question if you have a question for Kate.
Oh.
Everybody's being shy today. Look at that.
Everybody's tired. It's
And I don't know why, because there are there are a lot of non-shy people. There you go, Christine.
I would ask something. It might be off topic, so you can sort of working mom with school-age children at home during the pandemic. And what I'm seeing in my group, my kids are in college. I downsized thinking we had an empty nest, and everyone came back. And we are relocated from the East Coast. So that's my story, just so you have a little context. But my friends who have school-age children, they not only manage the challenges of bringing everything online with kids, they're working from home, their partner's at home, the kids are at home. What do you see? What are your thoughts? And how can we help? What is needed? And what do we need? What can we do as a women's club? Even small things.
So these are such good questions. And I will say that it's just been absolutely wild for me. And, you know, I think so much of this experience, these past even, I don't know, what is it, 8 months, 7 months, 6 months that we've been kind of quarantined, there are so many wonderful, beautiful things that I've been able to experience. I feel so, I mean, my family has remained healthy. We have not been sick. I have gotten to spend more time with my children than I ever have, really, as someone who's been working full-time consistently. I've gotten to go hiking with them. I've gotten to do new things. We've explored, we've spent time together that we never had before. That's been amazing. It's also been totally exhausting and infuriating. And I also, you know, I have my 2 kids, and I also live part-time with my girlfriend who has a 7-year-old. So we really have 3 kids. And luckily my son and her son can play together. But it's deeply challenging. My kids don't start school for another 2 weeks, so I'll see how distance learning goes. But we're all struggling to figure out what we're going to do to keep them engaged, because it's almost I feel very lucky that we have flexible work schedules. Their dad is relatively flexible. I'm relatively flexible. But point is, aside from my personal experience, I think the most important thing that the Women's Club or that others can do, what we know, I am speaking to you in my experience as an incredibly privileged person. I own a home. I am healthy. We have health insurance. My kids we have the funds for their technology. But this pandemic is already hitting Black and Brown communities the hardest. And we know that those are the kids, the low-income kids, the Latino kids, the Black kids are going to be absolutely hardest hit. Kids that are already way behind, that are in low-income schools, that are already really academically behind are by far going to be the hardest hit, especially kids who have parents who are essential workers who have to be leaving the house. So I think the best things that any groups can do is to go asking the school districts, asking parent communities, and to some degree, I think there's a little bit of a wait and see in terms of what people really need, because school in did San Jose Unified just start, or has it? You know, I don't know. Like
about to.
I think it's just like everybody's still figuring it out, you know. So I've been working where I live with, you know, with a nonprofit that works with kids whose parents live in transitional housing here. And how are we going to put together some programs to keep those kids engaged? We're working on coordinating, doing a volunteer program with local high school students and recent high school grads who aren't going to college. So who are like 18, 19, 20, who are maybe taking a gap year, or be home and have the energy to do some socially distanced volunteer work, to be overseeing kids during their distance learning, etc. So I've been trying to do that kind of brainstorming. What I will say, and what I try to remind people of, especially for myself as a white person, is when I'm faced with this kind of question and wanting to figure out what do we do, how can we have the impact, I try to go to the people in my community who are part of the community that's most impacted, and to ask if I can listen to what they need, rather than just assuming it, right? So I think often it's easy to think that we know. So like I said, I reached out to a person I know who runs this group and kind of said, what do you need? So I think that's one of the best things that maybe the club can do, whether it's supporting a community school or, parents groups, but it's, it's.
There's just so much isolation right now, the organizational, the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So if you have anybody on this call, if you've got insight or brain power around how women can use to redistribute their social capital to serve niche needs that are evolving, whether it's reading, somebody's got feedback, I don't know who, maybe that's a cue for me to be quiet. But anybody on the call, that's where the ideas come from. So get in touch and think about your social capital. What do you have to offer?
Yeah.
And maybe we can lighten the load, because I know that many women with school-age children really have a lot, and it just keeps coming to them.
Yeah.
It's coming harder and harder as infrastructure and other governmental agencies are failing to show up. Women are over functioning, especially that group. And I think we have to pay attention. I don't know what the answer is, but it's a conversation. So thank you.
So we've been, the Women's Club, we've been working on the farm worker caravans, and there's entire families that live in one bedroom. And all of us on this call right now are privileged because we can go to a private area and be on this phone call. Yes. But if you are living 5 people to a bedroom, 12 people to even a household, there's no privacy. I was sitting there thinking today, like, how are these kids going to learn? First of all, we got our cell phones or our laptop computers we're sitting in front of. How is each individual child in a different grade going to learn? Because even if they have the privilege of having one laptop computer, who chooses whose class they're going to go to?
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to choose, like, what child is going to learn that day. So I don't think people realize the enormity of it and how far back it's really going to be these people that are marginalized, that they're really going to lose so much education this year. And I don't know how we're going to necessarily solve it right now unless there's, that's a big problem.
And one thing I would add too, Christine, is, it's so overwhelming. And sometimes when I talk about activism and what we can do, sometimes I like to try to think as creatively as I can, and also to know, like, we're not going to solve this. There's so many systems and organizations, and you're right that everything's so isolated. So it's also a time to think outside of the box. Well, how else can we support families? And if you have a friend who's a teacher, get them a gift card to someone, send them a bottle of wine, have a, fresh direct, one of those food things sent to them. And as well to families, if there's a family in your neighborhood on your block with young kids, leave a gift card for Starbucks or for, for Safeway or for Target. Again, if you have that social capital, and that's just one little personal gesture, but ways that you can support, like, it's going to be a while before we solve these bigger problems of these families in the home dealing with technology. But if there's any small gesture that you could do to help lighten the load for a teacher or for a family or for parents in your neighborhood, an anonymous little gift basket or, with some gift cards on someone's porch, might go a little bit toward kind of helping someone in this moment.
Yeah, marking the days. I deliver small ice creams that are contactless to my people on my street. So, but I do think we all have to think about it, and I agree that personal is right now is what we need to work on, a personal pathway. So
I have a friend that goes to the food lines to pick up food for a family that she knows, because
that's a great idea.
They can't leave the house with all the kids and all that, and they can't make it even to the food line. And then her friend was like saying, well, how embarrassing, you're going to go stand in the line and pick up food, you know, like stand. And she's like, I don't care. They need the food. I'm going to stand in line and get the food. And then she buys them stuff as well. But, you know, just,
Nice.
I always tell people sometimes when you get overwhelmed with the world, the problems of the world, just think of what you can do in your little corner. You know what I mean? What can you do in your little corner to help things? With all this going on, I was going to ask you, Kate, going back to the books about, there's so much that has happened this past year. Who are these, the women, when you do the revision, you're like, I have to put this woman in.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know. I think about that all the time. So the two that come to mind right away, an historical person and a contemporary person, I do feel like should be for Beyonce, because I think Beyonce is one of our greatest living artists. I think that she does remarkably innovative, powerful work. And I also know that she does an extraordinary amount of social justice work behind the scenes. I know that she and her family are, I mean, I know that her sister is in Kentucky working on the Breonna Taylor's case. They do a lot of work. I feel like also maybe W would be for the WNBA. I'm a really big women's basketball fan, and I think the WNBA is being so incredible this season, really using their platform, again, to support the Say Her Name campaign. Before every game, they're honoring and reading the names of different Black women who've been killed by police. It's really fierce. And then historically, so in this book, I is for Isadora Duncan, and I love that story, but I think that if I went back, I would have it be for Ida B. Wells, who I think is—
Love Ida B.
I think she's one of our greatest, American people, and I think she's so, people don't know her story. I think what she did as a journalist, what she did as a suffrage activist, what she did to expose lynching and to document crime is so phenomenal. So I would be for Ida B. But
Yeah,
I can go through every—
I like Madam Walker too. I don't know if you saw the Madam Walker special that they had, the movie. That was really good. And it reminds me too of the soccer team, because the soccer team, women's soccer team, how they fought. They've been fighting for like equal pay from the men and all that stuff. I think they've been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Dorothy. So press the unmute button. It's on the bottom left-hand corner. Is anybody there we go. Go ahead, Dorothy.
It's Dorothy Atkins.
I'm Dorothy Atkins, and I'm a member of the San Jose Women's Club, and I'm also a member of the National League of American Pen Women. I'm an artist, and I just wanted to thank you for opening up the dialogue that you've opened in terms of racial injustice. Now, I came along in a time where racial prejudice and being a racist was hidden. Mm-hmm. It was very behind the scenes. And so you didn't know who or what you were dealing with until it happened to you.
Yeah.
And so I've been in situations where I've been the only woman of color in many, 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 many situations. Mm-hmm. And whenever, actually, I worked for a large bank, and I was head of the diversity department at that time. I was on the board. And whenever racial issues would come up, my generation and the generation of white women that I grew up with always said I was whining, that that this was just whining, that we should get over it. So what I'm asking you is, in your research, did you find that the younger generation of white children, teenagers, young people, I know with my grandchildren, they're very open in discussing racism. Mm-hmm. They're very honest, but my generation still has that very uncomfortable feeling about it. And I've always been the one that wanted to open up dialogue with all people. Mm-hmm. And my question to you, did you find that kind of resistance with people of my age, mm-hmm. that were saying, this is just, you need to get over it? Slavery happened 400 years ago, get over it, move on. Like I said, it's not really, I'm not a racist. And my answer has always been, you might not be a racist, but you also need to be against and be anti-racism,
Yeah.
be against racism. So long statement, but
Yeah, thank you.
but
Thank
my question is, do you find that, as I said, my generation is more, have they come along in terms of trying to understand racism any more than when I was a youngster? Or is that group just still stuck there saying it didn't happen, you're over exaggerating it, I don't believe it, or what? That's my question.
That's a great question. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's a number of things. Yeah, I think there's absolutely a lot of folks, white folks, who still are really dug in and just don't want to accept it and believe it. But I do think that there are a lot who are opening up to it. And I do hear from a lot of people. I hear from a lot of people who are, maybe in their 20s and 30s, who are talking to their parents, 20s, 30s, 40s, who have parents in their 60s, 70s, and are actually able to have conversations about race that they never had before. And I've had some people write to me and say, my 75-year-old dad just, read this book with me and they're really surprised, so I think people certainly can open their minds. And I do think when it comes to younger generations, yeah, I think that at least in the young people that I encounter, and of course we're talking about being in the, a more progressive area, but as we know, there's still plenty of racism, here. And, but I do think that young people are at least more comfortable talking about it, whether or not they get it. There is, I think what you're talking about is this idea that we just shouldn't talk about it. And I think that my generation, so I'm 41, I think that I was still part of a generation that was raised to be colorblind, so as a kind of, with a liberal white upbringing, that, well, we don't talk about it, there is no, this kind of thing where we don't see color, everybody's equal, right? Which I think we know is how problematic that is. So I think that each generation is doing this process of unlearning, unlearning, unlearning and also relearning, kind of the actual histories.
And one thing for sure is to have a conversation about racism is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It has to be uncomfortable until it's comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the part that's so hard. It's nobody likes to be uncomfortable. I don't ever want to be confrontational with anybody about their opinions or whatever, but we have to move past that part of just being uncomfortable until we can get to a place where we can say, this is what's happening to all of us. Because I've always said that what happens to one set of people eventually happens to all of us. And my example would be drugs. At first it said it was just Black people doing crack and going to jail for 75 years for $5 worth of crack. And then when opioids came along and affected the white generation, there was a different story. That's what I mean about what happens to one group eventually happens to all of us. Yes. So in my conversations to my friends, I always try to say, put yourself in a situation where you have empathy for the other person and see how that would feel. So it's just, I think this conversation is wonderful. I thank you for doing this research. I thank you for making it comfortable for these women on this call or whoever's on the call to have this conversation, because it's needed. And today was a good day for Kamala, and I'm happy about that. Like you made a good comment about stay off social media, so I won't listen to all the garbage about her, because I know it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
And, I'm just going to savor the moment. And I think I'm proud and thankful to be in this time where we can talk about something that was so taboo when I was a youngster.
Yeah, I'm glad too. And savor this time and then save that energy. That's what I think too, when it comes to social media. We got 3 months before this election. We need our energy.
Absolutely.
So is it going to be better spent in our Facebook argument with someone who doesn't actually respect your humanity and isn't going to change their mind? Or is it going to be better spent savoring this moment and doing the good work?
Absolutely. So thank you once again.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you, Dorothy.
If anybody else has a question, you can jump in now.
I'm Consuelo. Consuelo Rodriguez. I'm Dr. Consuelo Rodriguez. I just want to thank you, because what I'd like to say is that I hope everybody listening here will take that responsibility, that when an issue comes up, take the leadership in addressing it. Don't sit back and wait for somebody else to do it. I know that as a PhD, and I came from low income, and Darlene knows me well. And I also helped lead the walkouts, here at Roosevelt Junior High when I taught there. I know that as a leader in the educational community, everybody would turn to me because there were so few Black or Mexican PhDs, EDDs, and expect us to speak up when there was an issue of racism or sexism. They looked at us. And I'm glad to see you, Kate, and I'm hoping that all the other women who, not just those of color, but those that are white, like you, that they will take the position. They won't wait for the one or two Black or brown faces in the group to speak up.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kate, for taking that leadership.
Thank you. You're welcome. You know, it's the very least that I can do. I mean, I think for white people, it's the least we can do is to actually speak up. You know, I think that's, in so many institutions and workplaces and schools, it is always that thing. It's the person of color, or the one woman is the person who's looked to solve the problem or to explain. And that's to go back to my whole thing with Kamau and O'Brien. That's what that came out of too. With everybody was coming to Kamau saying, "What can I do?" And he's like, "You know what? Figure it out." And so that's what I tried to do again with my platform, is, you know, help white people figure it out, because you don't need to be asking your friend of color. You need to be informed and confident and be able to be the one to speak up when you hear something that's wrong, or you know, or to challenge something. So,
Absolutely. Thank you.
thank you.
So we have time for about one more question. So if you've been shy up to now, now's the time to speak up. And unmute yourself.
Darlene?
Hi, Kate.
Yes.
Hi.
This is Dorothy again. I just wanted to probably leave you all with just my message that I say to all my white friends, and I have tons. I always say, I don't think that all white people are racist. By the same token, all Black people aren't criminals. And that's how we have to try to put it in context when we think about each other. We're not. We're not all this or all that. And so I just think that's important, that we all know that and know how I feel about that. We're not all criminals, and I don't think they're all racist. It's just, we need to talk about it more.
So Peggy, I see you. Go ahead. Peggy, unmute
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Hi, Kate. I just wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, and that is that you said that you take your mentoring experiences seriously. And I'm just wondering if you have had a chance to work with very many women writers of color during your time of writing, and if you have seen an increase in women writers since that time, since you started.
That's such a good question. I really appreciate that. And you know, one of the stories that I tell about mentorship is that when I was graduating from college and I had a conversation with my mentor, who I admired so much, and she gave me so much guidance. And I remember in a conversation, she mentioned her mentor really casually. She said, you know, oh, I remember I was talking to my mentor, and I was like, you have a mentor too? And it was like this little light bulb moment where I wait, oh, the person I look up to has someone she looks up to. And that, you know, and so it's been so important to me. So yes, I have been incredibly lucky to, one of my first creative writing and literature professors was Akasha T. Hull, also known as Gloria Hull at UC Santa Cruz. She was one of the founding members of the Combahee River Collective, a collective of radical Black feminists in the 70s. I was able to work with her. I learned an incredible amount from her. I also was able to work with Karente Yamashita, who was one of my early mentors as well. And I feel like through the work that I did with them, they exposed me to so many ideas and writers that just became for me my norm. Like the books that I learned about from them became my canon. So there's like actually like a lot of really classic like white dude books that I've just never read that people would consider classics. Like that sometimes as a writer, I'm like, I actually haven't read much Hemingway. But I've read Jean too. I've read all kinds of other stuff. I've read everything Toni Morrison wrote. But so yeah, I really, I credit, and then I also, as in graduate school, I was able to work with John Edgar Wideman, who's an incredible fiction writer. And so those writers, working with them, really, really shaped it. I also ran the creative writing program at art high school. And so I'm getting art. Not only have I learned from people who experience, but I have also worked with a lot of young people, and I have learned, you know, I learned a ton from my mentors. I probably have learned more from the students I've worked with, the teenagers who are phenomenal writers and poets. I learned just as much, if not more, from working with them and being able to remain mentors to them. So absolutely, I joke with friends that last year I did read one book by a white man. It was probably the only one in like 3 years. So that is the work that I gravitate toward. It was a really good book. I liked it, but that was it. So thank you for that question. Oh, I can't hear you, Darlene. You're muted.
Okay. When I went to the Highlights Foundation retreat, and if you guys remember the Highlights magazine, they have like a writers camp thing. Have you been there before, Kate?
No, no.
Oh, okay. So it's really cool. But they were really encouraging women of color, because I believe it's like it's like 6 or 8% of children's books are written by women of color, all colors, everybody included. It's a very small portion, unfortunately. So they are one of the groups that's really trying to encourage women of color to become children's book writers, so we can see ourselves. So we're just about, we have like 3 minutes left. So just, do you have any final thoughts, Kate?
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts. I've enjoyed this so much. It's really delightful. And, you know, I want to, one thing I just would like to say, I think that's very meaningful for me about doing this event is part of what's so hard about this pandemic and the social isolation that we have is that I really miss, and connecting with the mentor idea is intergenerational conversation. So I really appreciate being able to hear from you. Again, I'm 41, so I'm younger than some of the folks on this. I do have a lot of youth in my life, like because I've been a teacher, but I really miss those being able to connect with people of different generations. And that's how I think the best way for us to understand the time that we're in. So I just really appreciate that. So thank you guys for listening to me and sharing.
Okay, and so we have 2 minutes. Does anybody else want to pipe in or just say thank you? Or
oh, it's okay. I can
Thank
certainly.
you.
Yeah, thank you all. And I am sure you're all reading a lot. I did want to recommend, I think that, I'm not sure if people are familiar, so speaking of diversity in children's books, the We Need Diverse Books campaign, which is is something that started as a hashtag, with a lot of these movements, like Black Lives Matter started as a hashtag, now it's a global movement. And We Need Diverse Books started also as a hashtag on Twitter, and it's become a full nonprofit organization run by incredible writers, many of whom are Bay Area based writers actually. And they really have done a lot to advocate for writers of color in children's books and all levels. So you can look up their website, and they do great book recommendations. So if you are looking for books for young people, if you have grandkids, there's a lot of great ones out there.
so I just want to wrap up by really thanking you for coming tonight. You're like such a great pleasure to have here. And I want to thank everybody that came and joined us tonight, because I wish that we could interview some of you, because I've seen some of the names that are here that join us tonight, and there's a fabulous group of women that are actually here that are doing a lot in the community. So I wish that I could interview some of you as well, because there's so many fabulous women that have joined us today.
Yeah, and I feel the same. I feel like I should be asking you questions. Like you're the ones I want to be learning from. This I can tell.
Yeah, so it's so great. A lot of active women. So, you know, stay in touch with all of us. Again, San Jose Women's Club, Latina Coalition.